A very different Sunday this week from last week, is that right? Any nods? Yeah. Did you enjoy all those Easter celebrations? You know, the ritual and the music and the candles and all the wonderful hallelujahs. Did you enjoy it all? Yeah? Magnificent. Well, as Helen said, today's Low Sunday, very different. No singers, just you. Bars, but very quiet, quite different. But it's a good day to be in church, I think. It's because it's the day we get to say, phew, what was all that about? It's the day we get to be honest with ourselves, if no one else. It's a bit like the morning after the night before, when we're all a bit bemused and tired and wondering, what was all that about? Was it worth staying up so late? Oh, I don't know. Was it worth eating all that food and drinking all that drink? Was that? Oh, I feel a bit groggy this morning. We wonder if it was worth it all, or if we'd got caught up in other people's enthusiasms. Today's a good day to ask ourselves, what was all that about? The Gospel reading that we've heard this morning from John tells the same story most years. And that could be because the lectionary writers are too tired to think about anything else, but that's obviously not the reason. But it is the reading that we hear from John's Gospel, and John's Gospel is the Gospel read at significant liturgical events throughout the year. It's the Gospel that intervenes in the ongoing flow of the narrative that the other three Gospels tell us in their respective years, week by week. This Gospel is primarily a theological Gospel and much less concerned with history telling than with theological meaning. And it helps to remember that the writer was not an eyewitness to the events, but writing 50 or more years after the crucifixion. So the reading that we've heard this morning, John's Gospel about Thomas, is not a reading about an historical event. It is not history. It is theology. It is asking, what was all that about? It's trying to make sense of experience, because that's what theology does. It's part of the after-party debrief, and it opens the way for the question, what have we got ourselves caught up in? The disciples try to tell Thomas what they had experienced the last time they met, when he was not present. And he, in parallel with those very disciples' own response to Mary's story of meeting Jesus in the garden, says, as it were, yeah, right. I doubt it. And then we hear the cliche that we're very familiar with, don't tell me, show me. Because Thomas wants to verify for himself the fantastical story that his friends are telling. And like us, he seems to be a seeing as believing sort of person. Now, biblical scholars tell us two things about this. They tell us that on the one hand, the storytelling by John is a little window into the context of the day. And it's a clear indication that secrecy and deception are prevalent in the Mediterranean culture of that time. And we know that from other pieces of the gospel. And that this secrecy was a way of protecting oneself and family and getting ahead of the pack, as it were. And we're still used to saying information is power. And in some places you certainly don't share everything you know or your sources. And Thomas was challenging what he thought was an attempt to deceive, an attempt by his friends to keep something back from him. Because secret knowledge was big and it could give you an edge, and he wanted to be up with the play. And on the other hand, the story portrays the all too human predilection to skepticism and doubt. And we know about that because we're like that too when we're faced with strange and unlikely stories. This is what we hear today. Thomas's doubt about the interpretation his friends were putting on their experience, and his suspicion that they were covering something up and not telling the whole story plainly. He wanted proof. Is not at all convinced. Well, doubting Thomas is what we often call him. But doubt gets such bad press in Christian circles, doesn't it? It's something most of us don't want to own up to. Be honest with yourself. Have you ever doubted? We mostly feel we should be persuaded, that we should be certain, that we should be convinced about the truth of it all. Believe the phantasmagorical, the metaphysical, the supernatural, the dead man walking, everything. But I want to remind us that it is doubt and not certainty that is the key to it all. Doubt is the key to faith, and it's faith, not belief or certainty, that will help us to be resilient followers of Christ into a new and reinvigorated life in our own time. And that this is the theological conundrum that the writer of John's Gospel is exploring. The most robust faith comes out of a struggle with doubt. And we only have to think of some of our most revered spiritual writers and thinkers over centuries. Julian of Norwich, Meister Eckhart, Simone Weil, Thomas Merton, Frederick Buechner, and even our own J.K. Baxter. None were 100% certain about all this stuff, this Christian faith stuff. They all had a corner for the, yeah, right, how does that work? And further, it seems to me that it's important to acknowledge, without the questions, the yeah, right, how does that work, the questions that doubt gives rise to, the why, the what, the who says, without the capacity to doubt, there could have been no progress in our knowledge and understanding of our world such as we know it today, with all our scientific knowledge about all sorts, biology, climate, growing things, the way the world works, physics, anything. We would have only been a docile, unquestioning community, accepting the status quo, unquestioning acceptance of what our old, established theologian scientists told us, because it was the theologians who explained the world. They were the scientists who said how it was. And we'd still be there if we didn't ever say why or what or who says or could it be different. Galileo, one of those famous scientist theologians who I'm sure you've heard of, said, doubt is the father of discovery. It's the courage to say, I doubt, that has led to great discoveries, including Galileo's own Sun-Earth role reversal. Seems to me that when we have the courage to voice our doubts without buying into the church's guilt about doubt, then we're nudging towards the robust faith that encourages us to question, that enables us to doubt while continuing in faith. There is liberty, freedom, life for us in this, as we engage our imaginations in exploring our world and our faith. The theologian and gospel writer John is, as the last verse of the first ending of his gospel makes clear, and the last verses we heard in today's reading, he's concerned that though we have not seen with our own eyes the wounds of death in the body of Jesus, we have heard about them. And we have heard too the stories of a different life, the vibrant, edgy life that Jesus offered to those who followed the way he was teaching about and shaping amongst those who gathered around him. John is inviting all who hear those stories to have faith in the death. That man did die, and yet in the new life, the new revitalized life that those stories could push us into as we hear them handed down to us. He invites us to consider the experiences of others alongside our own experience and to engage our imaginations as to the possibilities of living in a world renewed and revitalized. A world where light breaks into darkness, where despair is overcome by hopefulness, where things that seem to contain and bind us are broken open. Jesus was embracing a risky lifestyle, aimed at social change through challenge to the status quo. To those of state and temple who held in place discrimination, corruption, and all other practices and judgments that limited the fullness of life for the people of the general population. If we, as we sit here, if we are to continue lives of faith in the manner of Jesus, lives that demonstrate acceptance, kindness, compassion, and concern for others, lives willing to take a risk, then we must find the courage too to point out and to name the places where change is required. It's not too difficult to name low wages, lack of affordable housing, senior citizen vulnerability, poor health, places of discrimination, the narrowing of educational options, the reduction of news and social analysis. It's not difficult to name those things, all of which lead to a more vulnerable and risk-averse community, to a more malleable, biddable population that plays right into the hands of those who hold power in church and state. Jesus was convinced there was a different way, convinced there was a way of life that was more hopeful, kinder, respectful of those who were different, and caring of those who were struggling. He was convinced there was a way of life that we could all participate in that would bring change. And Jesus was calling the people of his own day to be courageous and to risk that. It's this life that the writer of John's Gospel was convinced was available to everyone, whether or not they had seen or touched the death wounds of Jesus. This is the new way. This is the new life. This is the resurrection life that we're all invited to embrace. Even if, from time to time, we doubt the stories we hear, doubt the vision, despair of a world restored to harmony, and doubt our capacity to participate. To be holy, to be human, means we have to act beyond what we ever imagined was possible. And that's the resurrection life that we're called to. Wherever you are on the spectrum of faith, wherever we are with all our doubt and our despair, we are invited to live in faith that life will overcome death, that hope will overcome despair, that life is worth living, and that we can be part of it. And so we might pray with many who have gone before us. God, through my doubt, strengthen my faith. Amen.